To begin questioning, I'd recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Kendall, Director Jarvis sent a handwritten note to the Secretary after his book was published, and we can see from the screen there, his note states that he wrote the book at the request of the publisher Eastern National. To your knowledge, is that true?
To my knowledge, Mr. Jarvis was the one who came up with the idea for the book, not Eastern National.
How did your team determine that Director Jarvis lied about approaching Eastern National to obtain the book deal?
I believe that they made this determination through interviews with Mr. Jarvis, with representatives of Eastern National, and a review of email messages between the two.
And his note says, I wrote this on my own time, but was that statement true?
I don't believe we found that statement not to be true, because we found that he did not write it on work time. He wrote most of it at home.
Okay. And then Director Jarvis wrote in there to Secretary Jewell, the head of Interior, that there are no ethics issues. Is that statement true?
I believe that is not accurate. It was his assumption, but we found differently.
And what did you find?
We found that really he should have started his whole process by consulting the ethics office about the propriety of writing this book, about any number of issues, including copyright and publication issues. Again, should have consulted the Office of Ethics and probably the Solicitor's Office generally in terms of the appropriateness of writing, publishing, and partnering with Eastern National in distributing the book.
Do you know why he did not consult with ethics folks first?
I believe he told our investigators that he intentionally chose not to consult the ethics office because he was afraid it would either slow down or thwart his efforts to write the book.
Does it concern you that that book was then made for sale through the Park Service, of which he's director?
It was made available for sale, as I understand it, through Eastern National, which is a concessionaire of the Park Service. And
let's touch on that. Eastern National, you mentioned they're a concessionaire. What does that entitle them to do, and how do they obtain that position?
I may be mistaken about the term concessionaire. They are associated with the National Park Service, and my understanding is they make the book available maybe through a concessionaire or someone who sells things on national park property.
So the Park Service then has authority to make contracts with individual contractors, individual companies, to allow them to sell or provide services or goods on Park Service property. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And so, as director of the Park Service, it sure would appear that he could have a lot to do with who gets contracts, who doesn't get contracts, and yet he used that position to get Eastern National to publish the book, and it raises other issues. Mr. Keeble, let me ask you, Director Jarvis is quoted in his report acknowledging the risk he was willing to take going around the solicitor's office. From what we can see, there was no risk because he was caught, and there has been no real consequences. Has Director Jarvis affected the credibility of the ethics program at Interior, in your opinion?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. I disagree with the statement that the director was not, there was no consequences for what he did. The director was disciplined for...
And how was he disciplined?
He was issued a letter of reprimand. He was, his authority to manage the National Park Service ethics program was removed from him, and he's required to take ethics training on a monthly basis for the rest of the term.
Okay. Well, from what I understand, people involved in supervising ethics, it's a thankless job, and most folks are delighted to get rid of it. My time's expired. We'll commence a second round of questionings. Ms. Kendall, when the current administration went against your advice and reduced the authority of the ethics office to and shifted back that authority under the supervision of Mr. Keeble, did you say anything about that? Did you have any kind of response, express any concerns?
Mr. Chairman, this happened quite some time ago. Mr. Devaney was still the Inspector General, and
This was when you were deputy, though, correct?
right, yes. Oh, no, I'm aware of the time, and the Office of the Solicitor, and I think the department may have had representatives, did brief us on this. The complicating factor in what we found back in 2004 was the ethics office was outside of the solicitor's office, but it was not staffed by attorneys, and the solicitor's office had an attorney in its office that would provide sort of ad hoc ethics advice, but it was not binding. And therefore, our recommendation was really to empower the ethics office, that it was placed in the office of the solicitor, in my view, and at the time Mr. Devaney's view, did not diminish its power. It just put it over where it could be overseen by attorneys and staffed by attorneys.
Well, we know, as Mr. Keeble indicated, that Director Jarvis suffered the excruciating punishment of being removed as in charge of the ethics office, which I've never heard anybody that ever enjoyed being in charge of an ethics office. It's about as thankless a job as you can have. But we're always grateful when somebody with a conscience is in charge. But Director Jarvis is still at the top of the National Park Service. So let me ask you about Mr. Reed at Yellowstone. He was the chief ranger and the chief law enforcement officer there. What is he doing now?
He is the superintendent at a park whose name I'm blanking on right now.
Well, superintendent is an elevated title from where he was before, isn't it?
It certainly has the appearance of an elevation, yes,
I mean,
sir.
he was chief ranger before, and then he goes to, as I understand, the Devil's Tower National Monument.
Yes, that's
which
correct.
As I understand, also is a plum assignment within the Park Service. Amazing place. That's not exactly punishment either, and I would bet that if you asked Mr. Jarvis which of your responsibilities previously would you like to get rid of, it would be getting him rid of the ethics office. But there are so many other issues, but I want to go back and be clear for the record. With regard to Director Jarvis's statement that it was Eastern National that made the request for him to write the book, and he failed to disclose the request he made of Eastern National to make that request, wouldn't you characterize that as his lying to the secretary directly?
It was certainly not true. You're right.
Are you aware of anyone in any supervisorial capacity that has lied to the Secretary of Interior that is still in their same position?
I'm not aware of anyone else who has lied or is in the same position.
Well, Director Jarvis admitted to your team, as I understand it, he'd been in trouble, quote, many, many times, unquote, for not asking permission. Is that your understanding?
That may well be in our report, sir. I'm not familiar with that statement.
do you have any recommendations at this time, based on what you have found through your investigations, as to who should be in charge of ethics at Department of Interior?
Certainly the designated agency ethics official who is appointed and is in the office of the solicitor. The other thing that we have engaged in discussion with her about is providing ethics training to all DOI employees, not just the filers of the public and the confidential disclosure forms.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kendall, in your written statement, and I realize 5 minutes is so limiting, you didn't have time to cover everything that you provide in your written statement. It is part of the record, but you had stated DOI, Department of Interior, does not do well in holding accountable those employees who violate laws, rules, and regulations. We see too few examples of senior leaders making the difficult decision to impose meaningful corrective action and hold their employees accountable. Often, management avoids discipline altogether and attempts to address misconduct by transferring the employee to other duties or to simply counsel the employee. Failure to take appropriate action is viewed by other employees as condoning misbehavior. That was in your written remarks. You do stand by that, correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Now, you mentioned that you were briefed on a matter in which an employee was detailed to another agency at the expense of Interior in lieu of using proper performance management, progressive discipline to correct performance and conduct issues. How did you find out about that?
Yes, this is in an ongoing investigation, but the individual who was detailed actually came to us with a complaint, or actually through another employee with a complaint about the manager of that unit. During the course of our investigation, we learned that the manager had complaints of his own about the complaining employee, both in terms of conduct and in terms of performance, and rather than addressing the performance and the conduct issues straight away, chose to use a detail to another agency.
All right, and just to make clear, going back to the book deal with Eastern National, this contractor with the Park Service, so Director Jarvis not only misrepresented, I believe you said, the situation to the Secretary of the Interior, but your team of investigators asked him specifically about that, didn't they?
My recollection is that they did, yes.
And the response was basically the same as was to Secretary of Interior, that he didn't request it, Eastern National requested the book,
believe
correct?
so, yes.
Yes. So it was misleading, misrepresentation, or outright lie, even to your own team, correct?
Correct.
Do you know who that was on your team that questioned him about this?
I remember one of the agents, yes. I don't remember both of the agents.
All right, then I have no further questions.